All right, so this is part 2 of biodiversity. We're going to start with talking about the threats of pollution to biodiversity. So many forms of pollution can threaten biodiversity, but one of the most serious threats comes from toxic compounds that accumulate in the tissues of organisms. So the classic example of this is the history of DDT and its use as a pesticide. So DDT was sort of used to wipe out mosquitoes. It was first thought to be, the perfect pesticide. It was cheap. It remained active for long periods of times, and it killed many different kinds of insects. However, there were some downsides to it. So the repeated spraying of DDT on crop fields led to DDT entering the streams and rivers as runoff for water. And there were two problems with this. First, DDT is not biodegradable. It is not broken down in the environment, is what that means. And second, when DDT enters the body of living organisms, they don't eliminate it from their bodies. So basically, what happened was something called biological magnification. So as it went up the food chain, it got worse. So while it killed the insects, then the runoff would go into the streams, the fish would ingest it, the birds of prey would eat the fish, and the birds of prey would actually suffer greater consequences than the fish, and things like that. So aquatic plants pick up DDT from the water and they store it in their tissues. And what happens is herbivores, so plant-eating animals, eat large amounts of plants and store even higher levels of DDT in their tissues. So it goes from the water, it goes into the plants, and the herbivores eat all of those plants and they just build up DDT because it can't be broken down. Carnivores then eat the herbivores, and the toxic DDT is concentrated still further. So you're taking something that was a small concentration in a plant. An herbivore eats lots of different plants, builds it up, and then the herbivores, with all of this buildup of DDT, get eaten by the carnivores. The carnivores are going to eat more than one herbivore, and so they have more DDT in their system. So as it goes up the food chain, it gets more concentrated. Biological magnification occurs when the concentration of a harmful substance increase in organisms at higher trophic levels in the food chain or a food web. So the top level carnivores are actually at higher risk because they are going to have the highest concentration, going to have the most issues. And that's how biological magnification works. As it goes through the food chain, it gets more deadly. The consequences are larger. And we saw that with DDT, with bald eagles, with the peregrine falcon, all species that were affected by this. They had soft eggs. The eggs couldn't develop right, so they didn't have any young, so you didn't have a generation of birds of prey. And we've had to do a lot of ecological regeneration of that, and we've had to do a lot of things to sort of protect those species. As you know, their bald eagles were endangered. The last part of the video is going to be the threat of invasive species to biodiversity. An invasive species, we actually have one right now. The murder wasp is an invasive species in Washington right now that's going to become a big problem. So an invasive species is a species, plant or animal, that has migrated to an area where they are not native. So they don't normally grow there. So they come in off of plains, seeds on people's feet. They're transported, or we bring them there on purpose, which is something that humanity has done, to a place where they're not native, and they just take off because they don't have any predators. So humans often accidentally or intentionally transport organisms to new areas. When introduced into a new habitat, these organs often become invasive species. Now, in order to be invasive, you have to outcompete the natural populations because of your lack of a predator. You are more fit to survive, just like we talked about in evolution. You reproduce, you have more offspring because you have a better fitness than the natural plants due to a lack of predators. So an invasive species reproduces rapidly because its new habitat lacks the parasites and predators that control their population in the natural setting. So what will happen if a new organism is introduced to an area where it has no natural predators? It's going to reproduce unchecked. There's nothing to stop it until it reaches carrying capacity for the area, so it reaches the amount of resources that it can use without using up all of the resources in the area. And in the process, it may cause the decline or extinction of other species. So you guys also might be familiar with like boats; they have to be cleaned off so we can stop the zebra mussels from taking out our aquatic ecosystems, because once again, they don't have that natural predator, so they'll just reproduce and reproduce, reproduce until they take over. Um, we do the same thing with fish. We have invasive species of fish. They're out competing different species of fish that are natural to Yellowstone National Park. They actually kill hundreds of fish, maybe thousands each year, just to keep our native species safe from the invasive species that keep coming in, just because of humanity either intentionally or unintentionally transporting organisms to different environments. Birds do it too. It's not just humans. So I don't want to be like, humans are horrible. We're not. But we do impact our environment. We have to understand what our impact is. And that would, when one of those things is that we tend to accidentally move species around, or we try and bring in a new species to solve a problem, and then we create a new problem because now that species is out of control. And that's sort of the story of our ecological mishaps throughout history. We're actually doing much better now. We have a lot more things in place before we introduce a new species to somewhere that it didn't originally start, just to make sure that there are ecological checks and balances and that it will not grow to be out of control. And that is the second part of biodiversity.